Thank you for listening to this podcast from TRE, Talk Radio Europe, your voice in Spain and around the world. For more information, please visit tre.radio.
Ger Sweeney presents Live on Eire in association with emeraldconnection.net.
Live on Eire, presented by Ger Sweeney.
And a very good evening. Nice to have your company for another edition of Live on Eire, the Irish programme. Before we do anything about what's happening on today's programme, can I say a big thank you to Howard. Many thanks, Howard. Look forward to hearing from you again tomorrow between 6 and 7 for another edition of Spain Today. And have yourself a very pleasant evening, you and Luna, won't you? I have 3 guests for you this evening. There you go. You're not dealing with muck, as they say. Patricia Traynor was going to be joining us very shortly, and she's going to continue her series on hidden treasures. I'm not going to tell you what she's going to talk about, but it's nice. Aye. George Lee is going to be joining me in this hour as well. Not for a G2, but for something completely different. George is a great man for sitting down and writing. He has a great sense of, I suppose, history, because he loves history, as I do. And he has a great sense of what people are thinking at times. And, you know, he has a way of looking at situations. And he wrote a story recently that I said, you know what, George, it would make a nice piece for the programme. And he said, okay, let's do it. So we're going to hear the piece and then we're going to talk to George about that particular piece. All right, that's all coming up in this hour of the programme. And in the second hour of the programme, we're going to be talking to Patsy McGarry, who has written a book which is called, well, Holy God, My Life as an Irish Catholic Agnostic Correspondent. And as the religious affairs correspondent of the Irish Times from 1997, Patsy McGarry reported on some of the most troubling scandals to have rocked both Catholic and Protestant churches over the last decades. In the book, he looks back not only on his time in journalism, recalling some of the most distressing stories that he has had to cover, but also on his own rocky history with faith as a young adult, a faith he eventually lost. I'm looking forward to that conversation because I enjoyed reading the book immensely. And as I said, that's Patsy McGarry joining me in the second hour of the programme. As you travel across Ireland, you don't see as many of them now as you normally would. But you have the old thatched cottage. And sometimes you get a thatched pub or restaurant or something like that. And they're beautiful, particularly if they're well kept and well maintained. Well, the owner of a thatched pub in County Louth has said that he cannot afford to pay his insurance premium after receiving a quote of almost €20,000. Stuart Carolyn, who owns the Morning Star pub in the village of Tullyalan, with his father Pat, said that removing the thatch is the last thing we want to do, but he is considering options for his business. He wants to highlight the challenges facing owners of thatched properties in Ireland. With the costs so high, he said, running the pub was now more of a labour of love than an investment opportunity. The thatched building is hundreds of years old and has been a public house since the 1850s. He described it as a tourist attraction and a hub for the village, hosting community, family and sporting events. Mr. Carolyn said that he has invested about €300,000 into the building to make improvements, including €60,000 to replace the thatched roof, but that insurance was steadily increasing every year since they bought it in 2015. The insurance was in or around €5,000 at that time, and after investing money to safeguard and to upgrade and replace the thatch, to rewire the place, put all the fail-safes into place to reduce the risk of anything happening, the insurance went from €5,000 in 2015 to almost €20,000 this year. It has got to the stage now that it's not even the cost, Mr. Carolyn said. Most insurance companies won't even cover a quote or offer a quote because of the thatch. In 2015, there were 6 insurance companies in the Irish market insuring thatched properties, and now he believes that there are only 2. He said other established companies that are insuring thatched properties do not take on new business, and he criticised what he called a lack of competition in the market. Mr. Carolyn said that the cost of keeping the thatched roof was hugely expensive. He says that if he didn't have thatch on the roof, the insurance companies tell him that this premium or his premium would be €11,000 less every year, And then the upkeep and repairs is another €2,000 less. That's 13,000 every year just to keep the thatch on the roof. It does look nice though. The Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage has said that it was aware of the current challenges related to the cost and availability of insurance for thatched buildings. There are financial and other supports available for thatched properties, thatched property owners. However, it seems that fire safety is one of the major influencing factors affecting insurance. Research carried out by the department found that there are on average 14 fires in thatched buildings per year in the 5 years to October 2022, and that during that time the incidence of fire in thatched buildings in Ireland was around 8 times higher than in England. It also noted thatch owners in England do not have major problems accessing affordable insurance. The research found the majority of fires in thatched buildings originate in the improper maintenance, design or use of the chimney, with solid fuel stoves presenting particularly high risks. The department said that these findings suggest that straightforward measures, like not using wood-burned stoves, would very substantially reduce the incidence of fire in Irish thatched buildings. There we go. Interesting. And when you look at it, you'd imagine that maybe they could put something inside that you wouldn't see from the outside that would be fire resistant or retardant or something like that, wouldn't you? I don't know. Obviously, I'm not involved in that industry or that business, but it would be nice if somebody that is much cleverer than me would come up with something that you could possibly use. Yeah. More people would leave money in their will to charity if the main beneficiaries from their estate got a tax break. Over a third of Irish people would include a gift to charity in their will if a tax break was available to their children and others who have been left property or money. That's according to a survey for My Legacy. Now, My Legacy is an umbrella group of 90 Irish charities working together to make legacy giving the norm in Ireland. The survey found that only 27% of over 18s in Ireland have made a will, and only a small proportion of those say that they plan to make a charitable gift from their estate. However, 35% of respondents said that they would consider a bequest to charity if it meant there was a tax break available. Where a taxpayer gives €250 or more to a charity in the course of a calendar year, the donation can be worth 45% more at no extra cost to them under tax rules. But the respondents to the survey feel more money could be left to charities from estates if the main beneficiaries of the will got a tax benefit as well as benefiting from the will. The issue of inheritance tax is controversial at the moment. A higher threshold for payment of inheritance tax, rising by at least €65,000, is on the cards in the budget, with TDs only pushing for a cut to the 33% rate itself. My Legacy wants further tax changes to make giving to charity a bigger consideration when people die. Chairperson of My Legacy, Niall O'Sullivan, said that in their pre-budget 2025 submission, My Legacy has called on the government to incentivise and encourage legacy giving. The findings support this. 35% of those who either don't have a will or have one without a gift to charity in it say that they would be open to including a gift in their will if a tax benefit was available. He said his organisation's research shows strong public interest in knowing and understanding more about the process of making a will and including a gift to charity. Mr. O'Sullivan said that they know that Ireland is one of the most generous nations in Europe, and the report states that 40% of people regularly support a charity. However, that figure jars significantly with the current low uptake of legacy giving, especially compared with the UK, where pro rata people leave 3 times as much in their wills to charity. This demonstrates a huge potential to increase legacy giving in Ireland. The nationally representative survey of 1,007 adults carried out online by Red Sea Research and Marketing also found that more than half of the respondents never thought of including a gift to charity in their will. However, the same percentage said that they would feel comfortable talking to a solicitor about doing so. Only 14% of those who currently have a will have included a gift to a charity. A third said cost was the main reason why they didn't have a will. Just over 1 in 4, about 27% in fact, of all adults in Ireland aged 18 plus have a will, with a further 5% saying that they are in the process of arranging one. So there you have it. It is something that kind of you tend to put off and say, must get to that. And some people do, some people don't. Haven't played this in a while. Here's music from Brendan Talon.
We had the lemon and the lime, the sun in the sky, all summer long, the grape on the vine. Man, oh man, look at the mess we're in. If there's love in these times, we could let some in. Oh, the war's still on for the minds of men, and emotions with the eyes to the right. If it's never enough, we can work it out. If there's love in these times, we could use some now. I've got a two-bed apartment on the second floor, and I think about my mother all the time. Give me your hand to hold on the lonely road. It's like I'll be out there for a while. Oh, look at the mess we're in. Oh, look at the state we're in. It's a heartbreaking sometimes. Heartbreaking sometimes. Heartbreaking sometimes. So let's love it. It's here, but it's not everywhere. Oh, listen to the sigh of the poor. Give them your hand to hold on the lonely road. It's like they'll be out there for a while. Oh, look at the mess we're in. Oh, look at the state we're in. It's a heartbreaking sometimes. Heartbreaking sometimes. Heartbreaking sometimes. So let's love it. Oh, look at the mess we're in. Oh, look at the state we're in. It's a heartbreaking sometimes. Let's love it.
Not the first time you've heard that on the programme from Brendan Talon. That's a song that's called, what's it called? It's called Love in These Times. That's it. Oh, well, happens sometimes, all right, I suppose. Right, we're going to meet the first of our three guests on the programme just after this quick commercial break. I'll introduce you to Patricia Traynor.
Live on Eire, presented by Ger Sweeney.
And you're welcome back. Patricia Traynor joins us regularly on the programme, and she tells us great stories and she themes those stories. And at the moment, she's in the middle of a series telling us about hidden treasures that can be found across the island of Ireland. Let's go to Patricia and find out what great stories she has for us today. Patricia.
Well, hello, Ger. Today I'm going to talk about spuds or Murphys. Now, no matter how you look at it, potatoes are part of Irish history. They originated in America, but they were introduced into Europe in the late 16th century by the Spanish. And apparently they were later brought into Ireland by Sir Walter Raleigh around 1585. In fact, in Ireland, the word they first used for them in Irish was an Spaniach, which means the Spaniard. However, today, an Spaniach would usually be translated to mean a sweet potato. There are many names for potatoes in Ireland. They're called spuds or Murphys. Murphy because it's a common surname in Ireland and because potatoes are vital in the Irish diet. The potatoes were nicknamed Murphys. As potatoes are also called spuds, people with the surname Murphy are often nicknamed Spud. Potatoes are called prati, and in the west of Ireland even fati. Potatoes have different names depending on whether they are big or small, or whether they are seed potatoes. When the potatoes are harvested, the farmer keeps back some of the crop to be used for sowing the following year. The part of the potato which has an eye in it is cut off to be used as seed for planting the next year and is called scollon. The remainder of the potato is called scollog or langan and is discarded. The weather conditions in Ireland are ideal for cultivating potatoes, and so Irish lumper potatoes became a staple food, especially for the poor who used to eat large quantities of potatoes every day. Potatoes are very nourishing as they are rich in calories, minerals, vitamins and protein. My mother used to say that a perfectly balanced meal would be potatoes, herring and a glass of milk. The good farming land is in the east of Ireland, and it is there that corn and wheat are grown. This land was confiscated from the Irish landowners by Oliver Cromwell and given to the English settlers. His order was to hell or to Connaught. The west of Ireland is exposed to the strong winds blowing across the Atlantic, and as a result, it's difficult to grow anything on the surface of the land. Resourceful farmers saw that crops which could be grown underground would be the obvious solution, and so they all set about cultivating potatoes. These became the underground treasure, which more than half of the population relied on exclusively for their diet. The tragedy came in 1845 when blight attacked the potato crop and the potatoes rotted in the ground. This meant there were no potatoes that year or for the following years, and so began An Gorta Mór, that is, the Great Famine, which lasted until 1852 and which claimed so many lives. As the potato crop had failed, people were unable to pay their rents, and so they were evicted. Families were left destitute. No homes, no money, and no food. They wandered the fields looking for something to eat, but more than 1 million died from starvation and disease, and another 1.5 million left to go to America, Canada, or Australia. Many died on the journey across the ocean because of the poor conditions aboard the ship, and also because many of the passengers were already in bad health. The ships became known as coffin ships. News of the Irish famine reached many corners of the world, and Ireland will always remember the generosity of countries which played a part in donating relief. The USA was one of the leading countries to help Ireland. A committee called the Boston Repeal Association was set up, and funding came from many states, including South Carolina, Philadelphia, and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was particularly involved as it was the second largest shipping port for bringing resources overseas. At one point, 118 ships sailed across the Atlantic, bringing the equivalent of 400,000 euros of aid to Ireland. The Native American Choctaws also knew what it was to suffer from starvation. When they had been moved from their ancestral homelands only 16 years previously. So they set up a fund to help the suffering Irish. And Ireland has not forgotten the Choctaws. On the contrary, a sculpture appropriately called Kindred Spirit has been erected in their honour in Ballick, County Cork. It is a reminder of what the Choctaw Native Americans did for Ireland, and it is a promise that they will never be forgotten. Now, when the leader of the Islamic State Ottoman Empire, Sultan Khalifa Abdul Majid, heard of the plight of the Irish, he wanted to send the equivalent of 12,000 euros to Ireland. But he was advised not to send more than Queen Victoria of England had sent. He agreed to send less, but secretly sent 3 ships packed with food to Ireland. The British tried to block them, but luckily the food arrived in Drogheda harbour. Another example of generosity to a country submerged in poverty and starvation. Some of the poorest countries who had hardships of their own, like Barbados, Jamaica, St. Kitts, and many other small nations in the Caribbean, went out of their way to send donations. Again, Ireland will never forget them. Calcutta in India also sent a large donation to help the starving people in Ireland. They had raised money not only from Indian princes, but Irish-born soldiers in the British Army and wealthy people living in India, but also from poor Indians who knew what it was to go hungry. Donations came from many different people, including Queen Victoria, Pope Pius IX, Abraham Lincoln, the President of the United States, James L. Polk, and the Jewish community in New York, to name but a few. In the 20 years following the famine, around 2 million more people left Ireland to go to the United States. In fact, by 1850, the city of New York had 250,000 of a population, 250,000 Irish-born residents living there, thus making it the city with most Irish-born residents in the world. Before the famine, Ireland had a population of around 8 million, but after the famine, the population was almost halved. Ireland has never recovered and is still one of the few European nations whose population is lower today than it was in the 19th century. The Irish language also suffered a great decline after the famine. Before the famine, around 28% of the population spoke Irish, but after the famine, this fell to 19%. And in 1871, the number had fallen to 15%. Many of the native Irish speakers had died of starvation or disease, and families who emigrated were often dispersed, and their language became redundant in an English-speaking world. Today, interest in the Irish language is rising, but it is only commonly spoken as a first language in the Gaeltacht areas. Potatoes still play an important role in Ireland, and poets like Patrick Kavanagh and Seamus Heaney both mention potatoes in their poetry. Both men grew up on farms and knew how hard life is for those who work on the land. Seamus Heaney, in his poem At a Potato Digging, remembers the potato famine and the years of intense suffering. The following is a verse from the poem. A people hungering from birth, grubbing like plants in the bitch earth, hope rotted like a marrow, stinking potatoes fouled the land, pits turned pus into filthy mounds, and where the potato diggers are, you still smell the running sore. The Great Famine was devastating and will never be forgotten, but it will also be remembered as a great moment in history which demonstrated the generosity of mankind, uniting people from all over the world to help their fellow man, regardless of their nationality or religion. Ireland will always be eternally grateful to all those who came to her aid.
Baby, I know that we've got trouble in the fields. When the bankers swarm like locusts, they are turning away our yield. Our dreams roll by our silos, silver in the rain. They leave our pockets full of nothing, and our dreams in the golden grain. Have you seen the folks in line downtown at the
depression. Now our parents had their hard times 50 years ago, when they stood out in these empty fields in dust as deep as snow. And all this trouble in our fields, if this rain can fall, these wounds can heal, they'll never take our native soil. And if we sell that new John Deere, then we'll work this farm with sweat and tears. You'll be the mule, I'll be the plow. Come harvest time, we'll work it out. There's still a lot of love here in these troubled fields. There's a book up on the shelf about the Dust Bowl days, and there's a little bit of you and a little bit of me in the photos and every page. Now our children live in the city and they rest upon our shoulders. They never want the rain to fall or the weather to get colder. And all this trouble in our fields, if this rain can fall, these wounds can heal. They'll never take our native soil. And no, if we sell that new John Deere, then we'll work this farm with sweat and tears. You'll be the mule, I'll be the plow. Come harvest time, we'll work it out. There's still a lot of love here in these troubled fields. You'll be the mule, I'll be the plow. Come harvest time, we'll work it out. There's still a lot of love here in these troubled fields.
It's not exactly about the famine or potatoes specifically, but that's Maura O'Connell from Ennis in County Clare and her version of the Nancy Griffith song called Trouble in the Fields. And I thought it would be appropriate to play that just after we heard from Patricia telling us about another one of the hidden treasures in Ireland, the spud, the potato, and talking about the famine as well. And thanks a million, Patricia, for that story. Much appreciated. And that story and all of the others that she has done over the last 3 or 4 years, 4 years now, I'd say, 4.5, are all contained in one podcast series that we just put them there for people to enjoy. And it seems that you are enjoying, which is fabulous. Just Google Patricia's name, Patricia Traynor, Trainor, and you will find it wherever you get your podcasts. Stories of Ireland and the Irish. Maura O'Connell was actually interviewed recently about that song, and she said that she has always been drawn to songs that tell stories and capture the essence of life's struggles. And one song that has resonated deeply with her, she said, is Trouble in the Fields. And this heartfelt ballad, written, as I said, by Nancy Griffith and Rick West, beautifully capture the hardships faced by farmers and the resilience that they hold within their hearts. She said, growing up in a small rural community, she witnessed firsthand the challenges farmers face. The song reminds her of conversations that she had with her grandparents who were farmers themselves. They often spoke about the uncertainty of weather patterns, the constant threat of financial struggles, and the changing landscape of agriculture. So there we go. Right, I'm going to do a very quick break, and after that, I am going to be talking to George Lee. It's not a G2. We're going to talk to him about one of his writings. It's something we might do on a regular basis because he writes lovely, as the fella says. We'll find out more just after this quick break.
Live on Eire, presented by Ger Sweeney.
You will be familiar with George Lee because he and I occasionally get together and have a chat about things that are happening that we're talking about in Ireland. We call that our G2 Summit. Listening to those G2 summits, they're a bit of fun, but you'd also get a sense that there's a lot more to George Lee than, what you hear on the G2. He's a fabulous writer and occasionally sends me bits and pieces that he has written, but he sent me a piece recently, and when I read it, I said, this would make a lovely piece for the programme. And I'm going to let you hear what he wrote, and then we'll have a chat about it, because there's a lot there, and we kind of dissect it. And it's kind of history as well, something that I love, as you know. So, George Lee.
You know, I just about remember the last of the mantillas that were worn by the women of St. John's Parish for a period after the changes of the Second Vatican Council. So that probably dates it to sometime in the early 1970s. What I do definitely remember, though, is the headscarf that seemed to be all the rage in the years that followed on. As a young child, being brought to Mass in those days, often with 2 or 3 other siblings, you were always looking for distraction. And the lines of the seemingly ageless women wearing those scarves fascinated a curious 5 or 6-year-old, especially as those scarves always seemed to have an equine theme. The colourful print of bits and bridles and of striding horses, often covering newly done hair that had just had a set put in, or even covering up poorly hidden curlers, provided ample diversion. My mother's prayer book, which now sits in my own study, provides a fascinating insight into her favourite saints. But it also gives an idea of the things that concerned her most. Prayers to Padre Pio, the Little Flower, Show Your Power at this Hour, St. Anthony, Our Lady, St. Anthony of Cupertino. Now, he was a man who hit the jackpot in an exam one time when the only question he ever studied came up. Never happened to me. And the Sacred Heart. They were all sellotaped into novena books in now yellowing tape. And even today they provide a kind of a comfort blanket when I leaf through them. But the things that captivated me most in those days were the mortuary cards. Back then they were black and white, with sombre prayers and pictures included. She must have had hundreds of them, and I must have driven her away from her prayers regularly, asking who these people were. I do know that occasionally, when I'd ask the question, a tear would cross over her face. Today, those mortuary cards are providing me with a great source of information about long-gone family. And sadly, they are now joined by Mam's own mortuary card, and by that of my father as well. Families too were bigger in those days, and it was not unheard of that a family could command a whole seat in a church. And when that happened, and boredom and distraction set in, it could usually be sorted out by just one stern look. The placement of the children in the seat then became strategic. The older and sometimes more sensible kids were placed furthest away from the parents, on the premise that they would cause the least commotion. But the youngest, and I was the youngest, always had to be closest, because then they could keep an eye on them. Occasionally, though, the placement didn't work, and you'd often see a rearrangement of children on either side of parents during the service. That rearrangement was quite obvious to those in the seats behind, but the threats that accompanied it weren't always that clear. But life goes on. I am now older now than my mother was in those days, and I probably understand the worries and problems that she was bringing into the church with her a little better. Those worries are universal for the most part. And you know what? They're also timeless. Family, illness, emigration, education, life's disappointments, family abroad, and a myriad of other things. In coming to St. John's Cathedral, she felt she had a place to share those, and the prayers in that now dog-eared prayer book gave her the strength to know that she had done her best by interceding with all of the saints and by sharing her problems with those faces that stared out at her from the black-rimmed cards. And her prayers were echoed by the lines of scarf-wearing women in the seats all around her, as collectively they unburdened themselves in a community of prayers. I'm sure at least some of those prayers were heard and answered, and that the simple act of bringing the worries of the week gave those women and my mother the headspace to carry on when times were very hard.
George, you're welcome to the programme. That was a lovely piece.
The background to this is my parish, which is St. John's Cathedral Parish. Well, the parish that I originated from, I suppose, have asked me to do a little piece of writing for them occasionally. Over the last number of years, I've been doing a lot of history pieces. In fact, I've written a fairly comprehensive history of the construction of the cathedral. Which happened between 1856 and 1861. And again, the spire, which is the tallest one in Ireland, which was constructed between 1878 and 1882, 1883. I've been trying to relieve that a little bit, I suppose, with other pieces, rather than it just being a research piece as such. And there's a lot of things rambling around inside in my head.
Really?
Strange reason. I suppose sometimes they just try to get out. And that's where this one emanated from. I have a little study here at home. You've been in it yourself over years. It's a receptacle of every kind of thing that has fallen out of everybody else's house that they didn't want. And it's slowly becoming just a cluttered area. In fact, my children want to make sure that I leave cash when I die so that they can get 10 skips to clear the place.
Right.
And part of what I have here would have been some of the things that came out of my parents' house that I wanted to keep. And one of those little things was my mother's prayer book. Now, look, this is religious, it's not religious. And I hope you picked that up from the piece.
Of course, yeah.
I'm not being overly religious, and I'm not being overtly religious, because that's not the way I am. Look, I have my own belief system and all of that, and I would never try to force that on anybody. But I suppose it's reflective, Ger, of another time, and this really, I suppose, is beginning to dawn on me a little bit as I head into, my late 50s, and I suppose the rest of my life beckoning in front of me. I used to think that my parents' generation was a very unique generation. And now I'm beginning to think that our generation, people that are in their 50s, that we were very much a bridge generation between very much an older Ireland and very much a modern Ireland. And we really are the last ones that remember an awful lot of this stuff. And the Ireland that I was born into in 1967 and the Ireland of 2024 are just two completely different places, and it's hard to put your head around that.
It is.
I suppose the experiences then of growing up were completely different for me than they were for my children.
When you say that the Ireland you were born into, we were born in the same year. I was in March and you were in November. When you think about it, George, the Ireland of 1984, when we did our leaving certs, were very different to the Ireland of 2024. But this piece brought me right back to it. I could almost smell the dinner cooking when I came in the door after Mass on a Sunday.
And that's what I like to try to do with my writing, Ger, is capture that, because it's lost. It will be lost. The overwhelming image that came into my head when I was writing this, and the one that started me off, and it's been in my head for a number of years, is the little old ladies that used to be in St. John's. And anybody that knows Limerick, and I suppose it's the same for any, kind of rural town, be it in Spain, be it in England, be it in Scotland, Wales, Ireland. But of its time, there was a bunch of old ladies. They used to hang around the back door. They'd talk about anything and everything. And they'd come in and they'd say their prayers and they'd go home. But at the very, very start of this, I can remember, and just it's a very vague memory, and some of the older people continued to wear them, and you'll remember it as well, these mantillas. Do you remember them?
My mother had mantillas, yeah. Or mantilla we used to call it, but it's mantilla, is it?
Yeah.
I think in Spain some women still wear them.
Yeah.
Because Spain being
kind
a very
of a head covering that women wore in church. I suppose they went out after the Second Vatican Council with a lot of other things. But women were slow to give up on a head covering. But somebody somewhere must have been a style in Paris or something at some point.
That's right.
Where people wore equine themed headscarves.
It was very when I saw it, I could smell the 1970s off that line.
Yeah, and there was bits and
horseshoes and
fascinated by these horses jumping through bushes on the top of women's heads in front of me. And they were hiding all sorts of things like curlers, and there was a whole terminology then, you know.
That's right.
Before the perm, obviously. But and here I am talking about hairdo, but, you know, I went down, Mary, and I got the set done.
I got the set, yeah.
Or the sister came over now and she put in the curlers last night, and they'd have these big head of curlers and they'd be sticking out at every side, and they'd be trying to cover them over with this headscarf, you know, that had been battered and bruised probably in the wind on the way down to Mass on a Sunday morning. And this fascinated me. And then I suppose I was back in the church and I started thinking about other things that went on, you know, and my mother's mass book used to fascinate me. She used to give it to me, I'd say, just to keep me quiet. You know, I was down on the seat in front of her, and my brother was probably serving mass up in front of me or whatever, you know. And this mass book was full of these little pictures and black cards of people that I didn't know.
That's right, the mortuary card.
Yeah, kind of had the same name as me, but I really didn't know who they were, you know. And as you started to read and I suppose become conscious of this stuff, you're starting to look at these and say, who are these people? You know, and they were all in black rimmed things, and it was all very serious because
black and white photos in those days.
Them and you know, "Sweet Jesus, have mercy on their soul" written across it, and you know, pictures of Lourdes and everything else on the front of them, and prayers to this one and that one on the back of them. And I suppose they became a diversion because you were looking to something to divert you.
That's right.
At the time, and that's not being unkind to the priests and what was going on.
No, but at the age of 5 or 6 or 7, you know, the gospel had no resonance. It didn't mean anything.
Yeah,
you know, you needed your dinner, like, and you had to do this first before you got the dinner. So that's grand. Let's rock on and do it. And in the meantime,
and you know, the high point of it was being allowed to light a candle. You know, to play with fire up at the back and light a candle. As a family, then we would go. I remember being awfully put out because we used to go to the novena on a Saturday night. The novena to our Mother of Perpetual Help on a Saturday night, a Saturday evening in the Redemptorist Church, which was a big thing here in Limerick at the time. But it was on at 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, Ger. And you will remember that at 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, a very, very, very important television programme was on, which was Wanderley Wagon.
Oh, yeah.
And if you went into school on Monday morning and you hadn't seen Wanderley Wagon, you were persona non grata.
And there was no +1 in those days.
And there was no +1, and there was no video machines, and there was no Sky Plus. And you know what? I never got to see it. But anyway, our family used to go. There was 5 of us, and the nearest one to me, like, is 5 years older than me. And occasionally, like, I'd kind of get on the right side of one of them, and they'd kind of engage a small little bit with me in whatever heart tomfoolery was going on.
Yeah.
But my mother and father would kind of put the sensible ones kind of close, furthest away.
Yes.
And then they'd work.
So the closer you were, the madder you were.
The madder, or the more likely you were to bring shame on the family.
By talking at Mass.
And I can remember then, you know, if you did, they'd put you to the other side, and if you were talking to one of the other kids, and it wasn't that at all, but it was the look, you know, that look that you got from your parents.
That's right.
Oh God, you're in big trouble.
Sorry, can I just say, I was talking on the programme last week to Marty Morrissey, and we got talking about his mam's funeral, and he was talking about when he was growing up and going to Mass in Quilty Church. Like, they always sat on what he called the short aisle. And, you know, I was an altar boy for years. And when you'd be serving certain masses, you knew exactly where families were going to sit. It was a great place for spotting young ones. When I was a young fella as well, in case anyone gets the wrong idea, I had my favourite girls, like, from different families for the different masses. And sometimes you'd be delighted to be on the 11:15 because you knew such and such a family were going to be there, or whatever the case might be. But it brought me back, George, just mentioning that, you know, sitting in the same pew, sitting, you know, in the order that you sat in as a family, brought me back there to all those days.
Yeah, and as I said, just take the religion out of it if you wish. For a while.
Yeah.
This was tradition, Jerry, and it was very, very deeply ingrained, I suppose, in Irish tradition. And that's been lost to a certain extent, you know. I mean, the nuclear family and all of that, and I suppose, are we the better or the worse for it? I think from a community point of view, Ireland has really suffered. That sense of community isn't there anymore. I mean, the foundation even of the GEA, if you think about it, was the parish. It was, the best of the parishes then come together and play for the county playing the county. This was my lived reality at the time. And I think back now on a lot of those older women, and they were an incredible generation. I think it was Tom Brokaw in his book referred to them as the greatest generation. My mother used to say, and Mum would have been born in 1928, and she would have said that they went from the horse and trap to the moon in her generation. And it's a great phrase, that they went from travelling by horse and trap to a rocket being able to land on the moon in the space of 40 years, 50 years. And they lived through the war. It was the emergency in Ireland, obviously. They were they were the archetypal Irish rural family, that had the uncles and aunts in America and in England and everywhere else. And that's where my mother's, I suppose, faith, that's where her view on life came from. And yet she was global enough to know that we had to move with the times as well. And we all went to music and we all went to elocution and we all did all of those things. And it was great, yeah.
Do you know what fascinated me about this piece as well was the fact that you were able to link in the women who would have looked old to us but would have been in their 30s and 40s, and that'd be about as old as they'd be in those days, and their headscarves and their rollers. But you actually thought about, and you did it with your 50-odd-year-old head on you, the troubles that were under those rollers and the troubles that were under the mantillas and the struggles that they had. They were all struggling at the same time because it was a tough time in the 1970s. But you never think about that when you're a 6-year-old.
You don't, and
you don't have to, thankfully.
A lot of those troubles, as I said in the piece, Ger, are timeless and they're universal.
Because we have them now.
We have them now, yeah. And people that are living in Spain or France or Germany, you'll find that the same troubles that everybody has. You worry about your family, you worry about your health.
The mortgage is due.
Your grandson is going to Australia. They're all there, someone else is in trouble and, there's trouble coming in the door and the guards are arriving and I think the collegiality that existed between those people, and they may never have even told each other what the problems were.
No.
But there was an acceptance that everybody had them. I suppose we experienced urban problems to a certain extent. Then there was a completely different set of problems as well as those ones in rural life, because people were depending on the weather, they were dependent on getting the hay in, they were dependent on... It's just nice to be able to capture these things.
Do you pick up the prayer book that much now, your mum's prayer book?
I take it out occasionally. Yeah. I look at it, Ger, from the point of view of a very simple faith that these people had. And in some ways, I'm almost jealous of it. And that sounds strange. Maybe I'm far too questioning. Maybe I think about things far too deeply. Maybe it would be lovely just to have that simplicity of faith and, not to really worry about whether something is right or wrong, to be nearly told it. And that's almost like the childish way of looking at things, I know. But there was more of an acceptance. And
well, you see, they were told something and they believed it because they had the faith. And it was before...
They also didn't have the internet,
Yeah, that's true. They couldn't Google it to see was Father Ryan right this morning. But there was just, as you say, simpler people, simpler times, simpler expectations as well. Will you talk to us again about some more of your writings?
I will, Ger. Yeah. Absolutely. You want to do it now?
No, you're okay, George. Thanks. No, but it's lovely to have you on and to do something different. And we might do an old G2 next week.
Well, Ger, we're coming into a very, very busy season, and just put on the G2 hat at this stage. We're coming into the American election season, but we're also coming into the Irish election season.
We have the budget on the 1st of October, and that's going to kick it all off.
The budget is coming, and at that stage, we can talk about bike sheds and everything else at that point.
George Lee, thank you so much for talking to us about that fabulous piece, mantillas and headscarves. Say you're welcome.
Oh, you're welcome.
Oh, I don't know where the manners are at all. Right. A nice piece of music, a little bit of singing as well. Roisin El Sharif, Fergal Scahill and Ruth Smith together. Here's Shul Ruin. News on the way. I'll see you at the other side of that.
I wish I was on yonder hill to stare I'd sit and cry my fill till every tune turn a mill. Is good to my forning slow. Shoo, shoo, shoo-la-roo. Shoo go suck it, August. Shoo go cute. Shoo go do the song is say is good to my forning slow. I'd sell my rock, I'd sell my reel, I'd sell my only spinning wheel to buy my lover sword of steel. Is good to my forning slow. Shoo, shoo, shoo-la-roo. Shoo go suck it, August. Shoo go cute. Shoo go do the song is say Neelam. Is good to my forning slow. لو حتى نكون في وطني نعيش بحب في بلادي نهر الدم لا يبكي. Is good to my forning slow. لو بقدر أكون في أي مكان لاقيني في الوطن السلام. شهيد حبيب الروح والأحلام. Is good to my forning slow. Shoo, shoo, shoo-la-roo. Shoo go suck it, August. Shoo go cute. Shoo go do the song is say Leelam. Is good to my forning slow. Shoo, shoo, shoo-la-roo. Shoo go suck it, August. Shoo go cute. Shoo go do the song is say Leelam. Is good to my forning slow.
Talk Radio Europe.
Your voice in Spain.
Live on Eire, presented by Ger Sweeney.
And you're welcome to the second hour of the programme. Nice to have your company this evening. I hope you're enjoying the programme thus far. If you missed anything in the first hour, you can get it on our website at TRE.radio. We have a listen back facility, as you know, and just you go to today's date and you pick 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. and there it'll be. Simple as that. It'll be there in a couple of minutes if it's not already there. I've got a great second hour for you because I'm going to be talking to a man that will be a name that will be familiar to many people anyway, whether he himself is or not. Patsy McGarry is and has been since 1997 the religious affairs correspondent of the Irish Times. He has written a book which is called, well, Holy God. All right, and my life as an Irish Catholic agnostic correspondent. Looking forward to that conversation because the book was riveting and he will be joining me very shortly. Before I do anything in this hour, can I say congratulations and the very best of luck. It's not happening until the 20th, but I want to mention it because we had some people from the Catheris Fla talking to me a couple of years ago in advance of the Fla. It's the 20th anniversary this year. It is a very big deal in Catheris, and I know that many people travel not just from around Spain but from around Europe to be part of it. It's taking place this year from the 20th to the 22nd of September, and it promises to be a very special edition of the Fla. If you're interested, you can check it out online, Catheris Irish Fla, and Catheris is spelled Caceres and Fla is spelled Fleadh. If I need to spell Irish for you, things aren't looking good, right? So that's where you can find the details of it. All right, as I said, my guest on the programme is Patsy McGarry in this hour. He's standing by. I'm going to do a very quick break, and just after that, I will be talking with him. Don't go anywhere, please.
Live on Eire, presented by Ger Sweeney.
As the religious affairs correspondent of the Irish Times from 1997, Patsy McGarry reported on some of the most troubling scandals to have rocked both the Catholic and Protestant churches over the last few decades. The name of the book is, well, Holy God. Or is it, well, Holy God? I don't know which. Patsy McGarry, you're very welcome to the programme. Thank you for joining me to talk to me about the book. A fabulous read, firstly.
Thank you very much, Ger. Well, Holy God, as you probably guessed, Ger, it comes from Miley in Glenroe. It was one of his catchphrases.
It was.
I suspect myself it was made up by Mick Lally, the actor, because it wasn't an unfamiliar phrase in rural Ireland, and he came from County Mayo, in Turmakeety.
That's right. That's right. In this book, you go through your childhood extensively, and it really sets the picture of a boy and a young man who was all set to serve God and be his servant forever and ever and ever. Amen. And then things went a little differently. And I want to start, if I can, with the introduction and the third paragraph on the introduction. And you talk about Irish Catholics. You write that Irish Catholics were encouraged to discipline the body through practices such as regular fasting by an already hungry population and the celebration of suffering as the best routes to be nearer, my God, to thee. And this, you say, was the life in the church that Paul built. And I was thinking, Paul? Who's Paul? Tell us who Paul is and what that church is.
Paul was not St. Paul, as probably a lot of people would assume. He was Cardinal Paul Cullen, who was the very first Irish cardinal, a man who came back to Ireland from Rome, where he spent most of his clerical life up to that point, in the Vatican, and indeed helping run the Irish College in Rome itself. And he came back as Archbishop of Armagh in 1848, and translated it, to use their term, to Dublin in 1850. And he was the man that laid the foundations for the Catholic Church that most of us who grew up in the 20th century would have been familiar with, and the church that is beginning to fall apart, or has fallen apart since then for various reasons we'll probably come to later. He was quite an extraordinary man. He was very authoritarian, very proudly Catholic, once boasted that he never shared a meal with a Protestant, for instance. He called a synod in Thurles, which really put in place the structures, the very vital, as in alive structures that led to the building of a whole series of cathedrals and churches and presbyteries and diocesan colleges, and I went to one myself, St. Nathan's in the Connery Diocese, small diocese in the west of Ireland, all throughout this island. There are 26 Catholic dioceses on the island of Ireland. It was a massive building program. He also introduced practices like Corpus Christi, devotions, benediction from the Continental Church, which became regular in Ireland. He was a man who insisted on people attending Sunday Mass every Sunday and holy days of obligation, brought in all these practices which took off like wildfire in the second half of the 19th century in Ireland. The numbers of priests grew rapidly. The numbers of nuns grew enormously. He brought in continental congregations, priests and nuns, to run orphanages, reformatories, industrial schools, Magnan laundries. They set up their own secondary schools in Ireland as well. They're some of the most prestigious ones are still run by the religious congregations, as you'd be well aware. And so he had such was his influence that by the time he died in 1878, he had put in place, if you like, an alternate structure within the British state that was this island of Ireland at that time. They had their own hospitals, their own schools, a community that really was more loyal to the church than it was to the state, which was run by Britain at the time. And that carried over to when we got independence in 1922. This state was very poor, doubly so because of the Civil War. And it was hugely dependent then on the church to run schools and hospitals. And for instance, we didn't have a Department of Health in Ireland until 1947, which astounded a lot of people. But that's the case because the church ran everything. And so the new state was hugely indebted to the church in financially and morally in every other sense. And so it gave enormous influence. And it did set about quite rapidly after 1922 in ensuring that this was a Catholic state for a Catholic people in the 26 counties of Ireland, if you like, almost as a foil to what became a Protestant state for Protestant people in Northern Ireland.
John Charles McQuaid was the Archbishop who had huge influence over the likes of De Valera, didn't he? And he could be credited as being one of the authors, really, of the Constitution. Am I right?
Yeah, to a point. He and De Valera were both contemporaries in Blackrock College. They both were teachers in Blackrock College before De Valera became involved with the Rising of 1916 and then the War of Independence and, of course, the Civil War after that and the founding of Fianna Fáil in 1926. McQuaid was still teaching in Blackrock College up to 1940. So when the Constitution was being prepared by De Valera up to 1937, he did consult regularly with McQuaid. Now, McQuaid didn't get all his own way. He wanted basically the Catholic Church to become the established church of this state. De Valera resisted that. He was also unhappy about the recognition given to other the Protestant churches in Ireland in the Constitution, and even to the Jewish community being recognised formally in our Constitution, which was quite revolutionary when you remember that Europe was going the other way where Jewish people were concerned. Ireland was exceptional, and that really came down to the very close personal friendship that De Valera had with the Jewish chief rabbi Herzog, who was the grandfather of the current president of Israel. And they were very close personal friends. They had some of the members of the Jewish community. The Briscoes, for instance, had been very active in the War of Independence, fighting for Irish freedom. The two of them subsequently became Lord Mayors, Joe Briscoe and Ben, his son, who died only about 2 years ago, became Lord Mayors of Dublin. But anyhow, De Valera ensured that they did get proper recognition in the Constitution. The Constitution wasn't Catholic enough for McQuaid, but De Valera did hold his ground, and it still was quite a Catholic document, beginning with the recognition of the Blessed Trinity, which is very much a Catholic dogma as particularly quoted in our Constitution. And so, yes, McQuaid did have a lot of influence, but he didn't become Archbishop of Dublin until 3 years later. After the Constitution went through in 1937, he became Archbishop in 1940.
You say in the title of the book is Well, Holy God, right? And then you've got My Life as an Irish Catholic Agnostic Correspondent. So you've lost your faith. And you go through that in the book. So something that I was pondering, sometimes when I'm reading a book and I'm hoping that I will be getting a chance to talk to the author, I read it with questions in mind, or I read it looking for questions and looking for hooks to, have conversation on. And one thing kept coming back to me as we got into the scandals of the church. And I thought to myself, as an agnostic, is it proof to you that there's no God? Because if there was, he or she would never allow their representative on earth to behave the way the establishment of the Catholic Church has behaved.
But anybody coming from a Catholic background, Ger, would be known that there's this concept of free will in theology. In other words, man created this world, and what we talk about, scandals in particular, were man-made. Let's face that. I mean, I felt people had a right to know where I came from in terms of faith because of what I was writing about. And indeed, I made no secret of my agnosticism while I was religious affairs correspondent of the Irish Times until May of last year, from 1997. And in fact, when I went for the job, I told the people who interviewed me that I was an agnostic. And I said, I put the point that, well, if I was a member of a political party, would you make me a political correspondent?
Which I thought was brilliant.
Well, I felt it gave me an advantage in terms of, I would hope, fairness, that I wouldn't be partisan, and I wasn't hostile, and I wouldn't be hostile to faith. Knowing what faith means in a person's life, as it did to me in my life, it was a hugely important inspirational factor in my life, and I lost it with deep reluctance. And as I say in the article, in the chapters, relevant chapters, it was a process of bereavement for me to lose it. It began with questioning the abuse of authority by the church itself on a local, petty level at home, which you could see what things were happening that weren't right. Then I began to question the divinity of Jesus Christ, not that he existed or even his teachings, but the divinity aspect. And then, of course, it went on from there to divinity itself, so that by the time I got to university, I really wasn't a believer anymore. I'm not an atheist. I know it's facile to say it, and atheists hate it when I say this, but I almost think that in this existence, it takes as much faith to be an atheist as to be a believer. It's such a complex reality we live in, and I wouldn't be dismissive of things spiritual. There are many things I will never be able to explain. So I am literally, to use the Latin word, agnosko. Sorry, the Greek word. I was taught Greek in St. Atheist College, the Greek and Latin is a classical college preparatory school for priests. And agnosko means I don't know, from the Greek verb gnosko, meaning to know. And I just don't know. And I'm happy with my ignorance. Okay. I've had to live with it for many decades, and life is possible without not knowing. While not knowing.
Okay. You mentioned there about, your faith and that. And before we get on to the nitty gritty of what's in the book, you do speak about your childhood. Will you give us a kind of quick overview of your upbringing and how holy you were, because you were holy?
Well, I came from a very traditional rural part of Ireland in northwest Roscommon, a small farm with really just nothing. My grandfather had about 14 acres of rushes. My father was lucky enough to get a job in Castlerea, a psychiatric hospital, and then it became a sanatorium for TB patients. And they nursed young TB patients, who were mainly young people at the time. My mother became a nurse there, and that's where they met. And then Noel Brown came along, a man who was idolised by both my parents, even though their politics would be very different. For the rest of their lives. And he, dissolved the sweepstakes, created these sanatoriums all over the country. Castlerea was one. He later became Merlin Park in Galway. And then streptomycin came along, and people were cured of TB. That had a profound influence on them. Neither of my parents were holy. My mother was religious in a personal way. She wasn't at all pious. My father did something quite outrageous in the early 60s. He stopped going to Mass. In rural Ireland, that was unheard of. And the reason was because his mother died of cancer when he was throughout his teens. She had stomach cancer, and he was the youngest in the house. And she devoted her pain to St. Philomena. And had scapulars of St. Philomena around her neck when she died, which she left to him, her youngest child. So when Pope John the 23rd decided in the early 60s that there wasn't enough evidence to prove St. Philomena existed, he removed her from the calendar of saints, and that had a deeply profound effect on my father, reflecting on his mother's dying, her years of pain when there was no morphine to relieve it, etc., and how she basically built this positive way or meaning around it, devoting it, offering it up for her own, God help us, sins, and that of the dead in her own family, etc. And that really, really rocked my father and rocked his faith. And he would go later on to funerals, and we're still great being for funerals in the west of Ireland. And he became a councillor as well, a Fianna Fáil councillor later on, and of course funerals were part and parcel of that political life. But no, he was never a regular massacre after that. And I went the other way, of course. Probably being the eldest son was inevitable. But no, I wasn't. No, I was a very devout youngster, mainly under the influence of my teacher in school, Mrs. Ford, who was a very devout Catholic woman, and took her religion very seriously and our preparation very seriously, and I liked her and I was impressed by her, and I would do anything for her. And I've often said that I've been with her for a couple of more years, the likelihood is I would have gone into a seminary at 17 or 18.
Over the years, reading newspapers, including the Irish Times, and you'd see a story by Patsy McGarry about the Vatican, and you'd look through and yeah, grand, and you'd move on or whatever. And it's only when you take a look at something like you've produced in this book, where you join the dots, that the importance of the church in Ireland, not just to the people that have faith, but around us, even those that don't have faith, it's hugely important because of where it was stuck. It was stuck in everything. And in some ways, in very positive ways, when you look at maybe Northern Ireland, and one of the first, toe-dipping exercises in the book into explaining that is when you talk about Mary McAleese and what she did the day that she went to St. Patrick's Cathedral. And I think you said it was your first scoop for the Irish Times. Talk us through that and the importance of it.
Well, I was in the job. I only started the job in March of 1997. Mary was elected in November 1997, and within weeks she was in controversy. I got a tip-off from a Church of Ireland source that she was going to attend a Eucharist service in Christchurch Cathedral. The person who said that to me said, Mary Robinson's husband is Church of Ireland, and they never attended a Eucharist when she was president. So they were at once excited and did not know what she was going to do, except that she was going to be there. Now, Mary McAleese was probably the most theologically literate president we've ever had in Ireland. She was a very active Catholic, still is a very devout Catholic, though a very critical one from the inside, as everybody probably knows at this stage. She was also involved in the beginnings of the peace process in Northern Ireland, in Clonard, and the talks with Father Alec Reid, and Gerry Adams, John Hume, all of that, before she became president. So one of the first things she decided to do, building bridges was her theme as president. And one of the first things she decided to do was she was going to visit every faith community in Ireland as president and non-faith grouping, just to make it clear that she was a president for all the people, though she was herself from a Catholic West Belfast background. And as part of that, she visited the Church of Ireland, but did choose a Eucharist service. So when I heard this, I knew something was going to happen. So I contacted our news desk, talked to them about it. It was a Sunday morning. I went to Frank Miller, then on the news desk, said, Frank, we better go up to Christchurch, be ready, poised. Went up to the top of the cathedral. We were there with our camera ready, waiting for her to come in. There was no sign of Mary or the family, and we waited, and they came in. And then we held our breath to see what would happen. And Frank got the photograph of her taking communion, and it was on the front page of the Irish Times the following day. And, of course, all hell broke loose because Archbishop Connolly was then took grave exception to this, said it was a sham for a Catholic to do such a thing. The bishops of these islands got together and said, we have to bring out a document to make it clear that Catholics can't receive communion in a Protestant church, and a Protestant can only do so in extreme circumstances. And they did. They prepared this document called One Bread, One Body, which was to be published in April of 1998. All the bishops, Catholic bishops of this island. But unfortunately for them, behind the scenes, as they were aware of, and we were all aware of, there were talks going on in Northern Ireland involving the British government under Tony Blair, the Irish government under Bertie Ahern, John Hume, David Trimble, Sinn Féin, Gerry Adams, and Martin McGuinness, to try and bring them together to create peace. And so on Good Friday of that year, April 1998, we had the Belfast Agreement, or Good Friday Agreement as it now has been. So the bishops were suddenly landed with a situation where they were actively trying to keep the people apart. And the politicians were doing what they've been encouraging them to do for 30 years, sit down and agree. So what did they do? They said, we can't publish this document. There were technical problems. So they decided to defer publication to the following September, which they did. And I think it was a disgrace, frankly, to do such a thing at such a time. Whatever about the beliefs involved, I thought the timing was shocking in the context of Northern Ireland and the peace process in Northern Ireland, that their intent was to keep the people apart while the politicians wanted to bring the people together.
I remember your book brought back a memory, a childhood memory, of being told that it was okay for a Catholic to go to a Protestant church, but it wasn't okay to receive communion at a Protestant church. And I'd forgotten about that. And that little act that she did was so important to her theme of building bridges, Mary McAleese we're talking about, but also, that also helped the Good Friday Agreement, didn't it?
Undoubtedly it did. Yeah. And it created a huge debate, which really, in terms of what Mary McAleese is trying to do, was only to the better. I mean, it highlighted for what many people consider to be a ridiculous situation, whereby not only in Ireland, I mean, the Archbishop of Westminster, Cardinal Basil Hume, forbade Tony Blair from receiving communion with his Catholic wife Sherry and their Catholic kids, and that was okay. It was okay though for him to do it in Italy, because there were no no Anglican churches available in Italy, so he could do it in a Catholic church. Bill Clinton and Hillary received communion visiting South Africa in a Soweto church, and they condemned that the bishops did in America, not in Soweto. I mean, it was mad. It was ludicrous, and it was people got very angry. I got very angry about it. I thought it was shocking that they were doing this in a context where, after 30 years of murder and killing, and people were on the verge of peace, that they should bring up this sort of division. So it really exploded in their faces, and I was very happy about that, I have to say.
I'm not going to go through, chapter by chapter as to what you've written in the book, because it stands on its own and people can look at it. So it's a general conversation about the book. But I do want to ask you about going to visit Bishop Eamon Casey.
Yes.
That name has come back into the news again now.
Yeah.
And you speak about him in very fond terms in the book.
Yeah, I'd left Galway when he became bishop. I was back there afterwards, but I mean, I didn't meet him in Galway. And I hadn't met him before the story emerged about him having a son with Annie Murphy in 1992. I decided in my first year in the job, I would use my holidays to try and track him down and see would he give me an interview. There was a twofold purpose in it. The Pope was due to go to Cuba for the first ever visit of a Pope to Cuba in January 1998. I'd never been to Cuba. I thought I'd like to go out there and explore it anyhow in advance. So I did, and having got to Cuba, I said, I'll go to Ecuador. And I don't know how I found out where he was, but I did. Mm-hmm. And I went there, and he had a strong social conscience. I remember seeing a riot program when I was a kid of the work he did in London, housing the Irish and then housing homeless people. And I was deeply impressed by that. Maybe it was the way it was presented, but anyhow, it didn't matter. I was very impressed by him. And at the time, I was still unsure about my own vocational attitude or outlook. And I said, if I become a priest, that's the sort of priest I want to be. Housing people, doing good in the community, active, socially. And then he did, as bishop, he was one of the people who set up TRE, which is hugely involved with the developing world and has done great work in the developing world. He became very active on Central and South America, where America was bringing down the United States, or Washington bringing down democratically elected governments because it didn't like them for political reasons rather than anything to do with democracy. And he and our current president were very active on Central and South America, so much so that in 1984, when Ronald Reagan visited Ireland as president and was given an honorary doctorate at the University in Galway, Eamon Casey and Michael D set up their alternative protest honorary doctorate ceremony on Eire Square in protest at Reagan being conferred with the doctorate in the university where, of course, the president was teaching at that time. Mm-hmm. And I would have politically be sympathetic to that outlook. So I went to see him in the hope he might agree to an interview. I wasn't really sure that he would. He was living in an impoverished area. Really, really poor area, poor people whom he had clearly taken to. He was there 5 years when I arrived, and they knew him as Padre Eamon. He wasn't there when I called around the presbytery. I left a message. I called back later on that evening, and I see this figure rushing in the dusk from the presbytery. From the church to the presbytery was an empty jug in his hand. I rushed up to him and I said who I was. He was clearly shocked. And he said, I explained that I am baptizing a child who's dying. I'll come back to you later on. He's going into the kitchen to get water to bless it, to baptize the child. Yeah. I met him afterwards, and he was very uneasy, very, very abrupt, didn't want to talk, relaxed a little bit afterwards, and so, there was no way he was going to do the interview. So I said, fine, okay, that's grand. Let's forget it. There's no point in flogging this dead horse. And I had brought a bottle of whiskey with me, which I intended to leave with him as a gift, not knowing that he wasn't a whiskey drinker. He liked wine, all right, but not whiskey. But anyhow, we sat down and we chatted about Ireland and about various things, and the conversation remained off the record. But what came through to me was how absolutely, abjectly lonely the man was, and how he hungered for information from Ireland, etc. And there was no self-pity, but he was very isolated. Only one of the priests he stayed with had English. He had very poor Spanish. It took him a week to write his sermon. And he said to me, although he transformed the church and brightened it up, it wasn't more like South American churches tend to be very dark. This one was really bright, and he brought back a huge congregation. And the following morning, I went to Mass there as a gesture to him. And he called me out, and they all gave me a round of applause. It was a very happy atmosphere. And so afterwards, he brought me back to the presbytery for breakfast, which is an egg, a boiled egg, with an elderly housekeeper and her daughter who clearly adored the man. And then he had to go off to say Mass somewhere else. And I didn't meet the man again, I'd say, for about 8 or 9 years. And at that stage, Alzheimer's had hit in. We kept in contact by phone. I did vigorously lobby for him to be let back to Ireland. There was deep resistance on the part of the bishops. I remember interviewing Cardinal Hume in London. He absolutely abjectly refused to let him back to London, even though Hume had taken over as president of Shelter, the housing body that Casey set up from Casey. So he was eventually offered a place in the southeastern English diocese of Arundel and Brighton. And he was there for 5 years before he was eventually allowed back to Ireland, to the rural parish of Shanaglash in Galway.
Did you understand why there was such opposition at the time to bringing him back?
Yes.
You did?
To be fair, I thought it was overdone. I thought it was petty revenge. I was very conscious of the fact that a lot of clergy, and indeed bishops, clergy who had abused and bishops who had covered it up, were still allowed to practice public ministry, say Mass in public and hear confessions. And he was here still being punished because he was a bishop and he let them down. I mean, the man clearly was a hypocrite. I mean, he didn't abide by his own vow of celibacy, for instance, and he had affairs with other women. That became more and more clear. I could see why the bishops would be nervous about that then. If they did allow him back into public ministry, another woman came forward, that they'd have to remove him from ministry again, and they'd look doubly foolish. And but I liked him on a personal level, and we kept in contact by phone, as I said, and then the Alzheimer's really became a huge factor. And when he was actually it had begun when he was in England. He'd had 4 mini strokes over there, and they did diagnose the beginnings of Alzheimer's, which became very, very pronounced. I remember meeting him at a Troker function in 2010, and the man didn't know who I was, or he didn't know what I was, and I had to end up explaining, and then that became a bit ludicrous, I thought.
I was reading the book, I think the week after the documentary on RTE appeared, and I wondered to myself, so I'll ask you, would you have written your piece on Eamon Casey differently if that had been aired as you were writing it?
No. And I'll tell you why. I wrote that book last year. Most of it. The allegations that were repeated in the documentary were initially made in 2019, in March 2019, in an Irish Mail and Sunday article. And I happened to be with Marion Finucane on radio that day by sheer coincidence.
Okay.
And Marion asked me about it, and I said, I'm very disturbed by this. I said there are holes in the article that made me very uneasy. And there was a complaint by the Mail on Sunday to the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland about what I said, and it was rejected. Now, meantime, during that process, I was approached to take part in that documentary. And the interview with me was in January, February, around that period of 2020, 4.5 years ago.
Okay.
4.5 years before it was broadcast. I went into great detail about my concerns in that interview, and I was interviewed for about 3 hours, about the allegations being made against Eamon Casey. They broadcast one line. I mean, fine, that's documentaries for you. But I have grave concerns because, for the very simple reason that the complaint by Patricia, his niece, was made initially in November 2005. It was made in a particular context. It was after the publication of the very first report into clerical child sex abuse in Ireland, the Ferns report, which was published in October 2005. She made the allegation, the guards got involved, she was in the UK at the time. They went over and interviewed her in January 2006. They continued their investigation throughout 2006 and interviewed Casey in August 2006 for 6 hours. Now, both he and the niece were in London. And within weeks, he was being investigated in the context of 13 separate charges levelled by her, it seems. The guards threw it out. There wasn't enough evidence to bring charges. Now, there's been no new evidence since then. Now, the Garda Commissioner announced after that documentary that he's going to have a look at the conduct of that Garda investigation, and I welcome that. But, I mean, I do not doubt for a minute that Patricia Donovan believes what she says.
Okay.
But there are question marks. There are serious question marks over it. As regards the other cases, if you want to go into them, I can, Ger.
No, not at all. No, there's no point. This isn't about Eamon Casey. It was a question that I had for you in relation to it.
There's another reason I'm concerned about these allegations. First of all, I mean, they are not evidence, and there is no evidence to corroborate them, any of them so far. Is that, I mean, they diminish the allegations that have been proven. And the people who were like Mary Collins or Darren McGavin, who have been through the whole courts process and the ordeal that was. I don't think you can take allegations, I mean, like snuff it away and throw them around here, there and everywhere and accept them all as evidence. They are not evidence. They have to be proved. And I know that's not easy to prove, and I don't want to be discouraging people from coming forward. But I mean, there are ways of proving things, but in this case, they are unproven.
When you were applying for the job as the religious correspondent for the Irish Times, had you any concept of how much scandal you'd actually be covering?
No, to be very frank about it. In fact, I started the job in March 1997, and it was that summer that Brendan Smith was jailed down here for the first time for about 13 years, and he died 1 month into his sentence in the Curragh camp. Now, Brendan Smith had already done time or served time in Belfast, having been convicted in 1993 there of abusing 3 members of the one family in the Falls Road. The man had a shocking record in all over Ireland because he used to give retreats. He was an Orbitine priest. He wasn't a diocesan priest. The order itself just seemed to turn a blind eye, even though one of their members did all he could to try and stop that man. The church authorities overall weren't terribly interested. Even Sean Brady, who was then a teacher in St. Patrick's in Cavan, he's currently Cardinal Sean Brady. He was a young canon lawyer, was sent to supervise an investigation of an allegation by one young fellow, Tom Boland, that he had been abused, Brendan Boland, who he'd been abused by Brendan Smith. He and other priests brought him in to conduct this canonical or church inquiry by their own strict rules. The boy's father was kept out, and they quizzed the young fellow in intimate detail about what happened to him. He provided them with other names. Sean Brady interviewed another young man in Cavan without telling his parents, and his parents were never told. I mean, the way the church, and to protect the integrity of the church's process. And nothing happened, and Brendan Smith continued to abuse kids. But anyhow, that was in the early 70s periods. In 1993, there was a counterpoint program on BBC or UTV after he was jailed for the first time. And then after he completed his sentence in Northern Ireland, he was sentenced down here. But I thought, as most other people did, that he was an aberration. But he wasn't. I mean, other people came forward. Like the first man to go public about his abuse by a priest in Dublin was Andrew Madden. Who alleged that Ivan Payne had abused him, and that went through the courts process. Then you had Colin O'Gorman, who's suing the Pope. His documentary about his experiences with Sean Fortune in Ferns led to the Ferns report. You've had the likes of Mary Collins, an extraordinary, quiet, reserved woman who was abused by Paul McGuinness, who was jailed as well for abusing her. Darren McGavin, an extraordinary young fella who was savagely abused by Tony Walsh, who's still in jail, and they reckon could have abused up to 120 kids in Dublin. I mean, that's the scale of what you're talking about. But I know when Brendan Smith was jailed, I thought he was probably a once-off.
Where is the church now in Ireland?
Well, the church that Paul built, Ger, is in deep, deep trouble. I think it's finished. But that doesn't mean Catholicism is finished in Ireland. I mean, there have been talks given about this, and they're quite valid. There have been 6 different forms, or as they put it in that awful word, iterations of Christianity in Ireland since St. Patrick arrived in 432. You had the monastic church, you had the diocesan church set up just about 1,000 years ago that we're most familiar with. You had the Reformation, Counter-Reformation church, and now, if you like, the end of the church that Paul built, which is only about 150 years in existence. And speaking as an agnostic, but as I would hope an objective observer, I do believe Catholicism will remain. It's part and parcel, if you like, of the identity of a lot of Irish people still. I mean, I describe myself as an Irish Catholic agnostic. Culturally Catholic. That's my background. I was shaped by the church. And indeed, a lot of the belief systems I have came from the church's social policy, which is rooted in the teachings of Jesus Christ. Even though I may have difficulty believing he was God, I do believe he existed, and I do take great solace and conviction from his teachings.
Okay.
But So, I mean, and look at the history of the Irish people with the church. I mean, particularly when when it survived the penal laws and that period of shocking persecution, you have to say there's a deep attachment there. But I think it needs to be attacked vigorously for the Irish to hold on to it. So, in other words, let them try and take it from the people, and then they'll defend it more vigorously. Whereas what's happened now is purely self-inflicted by the church itself. It got above its station. It like a beggar on horseback. It treated the people shockingly poorly, beat them down, took over from one form of rulers into the other. Even the big houses they lived in after independence. You go to any parish, even still in Ireland, the best house tended to be the presbytery where the priest lived. And the finest building was, of course, the church on a height, usually. And really, in a sense, they supplanted the landlords and took over that role. And were often less benign in the way they treated the people. Very, very authoritarian, dour church it was in the mid-20th century, particularly. A lot of angry men in charge.
Indeed. Are Irish Catholics different to British Catholics or American or Spanish Catholics?
I think we are different. I mean, when you look at the church in Italy and Spain and Portugal, those countries, for instance, it's a much more relaxed institution, particularly in attitudes to sex and sexuality, and much more at ease with the body, to go back where we started. But we have a peculiar form of Catholicism in Ireland, or had, which is heavily influenced by Victorian Puritanism, which really originated in evangelical Protestantism in the UK, particularly Wales, believe it or not, in the mid to latter part of the 19th century. And, of course, Irish Catholics were emancipated in 1829. They're hardly off their knees before the famine hit. Then in the 1850s and 60s, they began to rebuild themselves. They wanted to be more respectable than the respectable themselves. So they wanted to outdo the Victorians in terms of sexual morality, etc. And that had a huge influence in the type of Catholicism that evolved in Ireland, which is very, very, and unusually for Catholicism, very puritanical. Whereas English Catholics tended to be, mainly aristocratic. The native English Catholics who hung on to their religion from and through the Reformation period, the English are still quite fascinated by them. The people of Evelyn Waugh, Brideshead Revisited, Princess Diana in particular was very attracted to them and was supposed to be on the verge of conversion, whether you can believe it or not. The Duke of Norfolk would be the most public manifestation of them. They were regarded with, as quite exotic, even in England itself, among their own aristocracy. So there'd be different. Then you have the immigrant Catholics, like the Irish, and the people coming from other parts of the Caribbean countries, in particular, Spanish-speaking, as you have in the United States too, as well. They were working-class Catholics. They were looked down upon by English Catholics. I came up against this myself when I wrote an article for the tablet in about the year 2000, I think it was 2002. The then editor asked me to write about the Irish Catholic Church and what was happening in the Irish Catholic Church. And I wrote a piece about what was then a fairly new phenomenon, was the number of Irish names among convicted child sex abusers involving priests in Canada, the United States, New Zealand, Australia, England, and of course here. And he said to me, came back to me in a flitter, he said, I can't possibly publish that in the tablet. The Catholic Weekly. He says, we have spent so much time trying to get away from the perception that we are anti-Irish, that we're, in other words, pro-English Catholics, not anti-Irish working-class Catholics in the cities of the UK. So he wouldn't have the article. So I published it in the Irish Times.
Well, there's a great, you gave a good insight into travelling with the Pope and the bubble, as you call it, that you're in. And so you're never where the Pope is. You're always there ahead of him and, you're gone to the next place and so on and so forth. What's it like being in the presence of a Pope when you're a non-believer?
I have great time for the current man, I must say, on a human level. I think he's a lovely guy. Genuine human being. And as such, not without flaws, a very warm man who likes people. Benedict was a very austere man, aloof, quite the contrast. A man who I would suspect myself never wanted to be Pope, and did the most extraordinary thing for a man of his tradition or his background. The most radical thing of any Pope in modern times, he resigned. John Paul was a figure I hugely admired politically. I think that he was enormously influential in the collapse of the Soviet Union.
He was.
The liberation of Eastern Europe. his visits to Poland in the earlier years of his pontificate, and his support for solidarity was huge. Yet this man totally opposed the involvement of clergy in politics. He waved his finger at Jesuits involved in government in South and Central America. Yeah, his greatest contribution has been political. He was a very conservative man, very, very, very old school when it came to any of the issues, whether it be contraception, women's role in the church, homosexuality, very, very hard line. And of course, often what he said was articulated for him by Ratzinger or Benedict as he became. A classic number 2 man who could make the balls, but couldn't throw them himself when it came to it. So of the 3, I would say the current man would be my favourite.
Has the Irish Church cleaned itself up adequately? By saying that, I mean, are there enough protections in place now? Are they abiding by the promises that they have made? Because we know that they've disregarded them in the past.
I do believe so. Okay. And I would say that comes down to one man, Ian Elliott. Well, not to be fair, 2 men. The former Archbishop of Dublin, Gerard Martin, who was very committed to sorting the issue out, who was very, very committed to abuse survivors, had immense patience, and because some abuse survivors can be difficult people to deal with for obvious and understandable reasons. He helped to recruit in Ian Elliott, who had a long track record on child protection in Northern Ireland, and put in place child protection measures there for the DHSS, a man who was actually Presbyterian by background, a Dubliner who spent most of his career in Northern Ireland, who put in place very, very rigorous, stringent measures for every Catholic institution in the Republic, on the island of Ireland, because the Catholic Church, like all churches, is an all-island institution, whether it be the religious congregations or parishes. And then they conduct these ongoing inspections, which have been conducted by his successors, and they have been implementing very rigorous child protection standards. And they're assisted on the ground by a small battalion of mainly women, who will absolutely make sure that children are safe. So I'd have to say, and repeated over many years, that probably one of the safest places for a child in Ireland today is in the Catholic Church context.
Lovely.
They've learned a severe lesson.
Have you a highlight of your career? Is there a highlight, something that stands out for you?
There were many, I suppose. I mean, it has been an extraordinary job in that I've been all over the world almost. I wouldn't have had that in any other role in the paper. It was something I hadn't anticipated. I accompanied John Paul on his visit to the Holy Land in the year 2000, which is an extraordinary visit.
Really?
I remember him, particularly in Israel. He arrived to a very, very cold reception, even though he was probably more Jewish-friendly Pope, one of the certainly in history, apart from probably John the 23rd. And he arrived to a very cool reception, but then all this stuff came out about his role in rescuing a woman from a concentration camp, how he went through himself in Poland during the war years, working in the salt mines, the young man, Nazis had him down there, and what the efforts he'd made visiting synagogues in Rome itself. And then he went to the Wailing Wall and he prayed like a Jew, and he inserted his prayer like a Jew, and he visited the Yad Vashem Museum. And by the time the man left Jerusalem, he had them all in his pocket. And I think one minister greeted him at Ben Gurion Airport when he arrived. Practically entire Israeli cabinet accompanied him to the airport when he was leaving. It was triumph. I mean, remarkable thing to witness in terms of the geopolitics involved as well, because traditionally the Vatican has been very close to the Palestinian people and is still. And in fact, when John Paul said Mass in Manger Square in Bethlehem, sitting in the front row was Yasser Arafat, a Muslim, admittedly, but he was there too as well in recognition of that. And the Papacy generally has a very close relationship with the monarchy in Jordan. And when he visited Jordan as well, John Paul was warmly welcomed by the current king, who was just in office a short period of time, King Hussein's son. So yeah, that was a highlight. That was an extraordinary event to cover, because it was the year 2000, second millennium of Christianity, and it was quite remarkable. And of course, I've been in Rome for the election of Benedict. I mean, the funeral of John Paul was an extraordinary occasion. It was epic. He was like something out of the Ten Commandments movie by Cecil B. DeMille. It was on such a massive scale, 3,000 people, and the import of it for the people who were there. I mean, they say approximately 3 million people turned up, mainly young Poles, some of whom had walked from Poland. That was a huge event. The election of Benedict too as well. and then the election of Francis. But I mean, the funeral of John Paul was quite a remarkable event to cover. Absolutely.
Did you have to work hard to keep your own mental well-being in check when you came across so much scandal and so much bad stuff?
Well, I was asked about this only fairly recently about a man who's a psychotherapist himself, when the story about Black Rock blew up in November 2022. And I'd known the man not very well, but I knew him, and he asked me to interview him about his experience. And he wanted to do it personally. Now, I mean, I had got to the stage over the years of doing such interviews over the phone. I found it basically necessary. I found it difficult to do them face to face. And I just lose my composure, as did happen when I'm interviewing people face to face. And it was a way of keeping it at a remove. And we talked for hours on the record. When he felt like he wasn't able to go any further, we'd stop and we'd go on the record again. And this man had gone through 800 hours of therapy. And he was out the other end. He had qualified himself as a psychotherapist. His wife was a psychotherapist. He was very lucky in having a great, great support in his wife. And he raised the question, what about people like you dealing with this issue? Do you go for psychotherapy? And I said, maybe it's just pride or whatever. I said, no, I don't think I needed to. I said, I keep it at a remove. I rarely discuss abuse with people who have been abused. If they want to talk about it, that is fine. Usually the people I deal with who are survivors have been through the courts process. It's not necessary for me to go through it with them. It's all there in the public record already. And so we don't have to go there. What I deal with then is how they're being dealt with by either the secular authorities, the civil authorities, or the church authorities. I mean, they are proven abuse survivors. So it's not necessary for me to talk about what they went through, unless it is necessary, if you know what I mean. So we concentrate on their campaign to get justice, whether it be from the church or from the state. All right.
Do you miss it? And do you keep up to date with what's happening?
I keep up to date with what's happening. I don't miss it because I'm still not out of it. I retired from the paper, but by choice, I am on a freelance contract with the Irish Times to keep up to date with things. It suits me. It suits them. I don't play golf. I enjoy the job. I enjoy working for the paper. I feel it's a privilege to work for the paper. And I have a lot of good friends and contacts in the abuse context, the abuse world, if you like, abuse survivors. And I like to help out them as far as I can. It's not always easy either, and I'm not really the best person for it sometimes. But no, I feel it's worth it. I feel I get fulfillment out of feeling I'm contributing something positive.
Okay. The book is called Well, Holy God, My Life as an Irish Catholic Agnostic Correspondent. Patsy McGarry, it's been an honour to talk to you, and a pleasure as well, and a fantastic read. It is available in all good bookstores. It's available online, but the good news for our listeners is that it's available on our website. We've got a virtual bookstore there, TRE.radio. That's where our listeners can get their hands on it, and I hope that they do so in their droves. And thank you for talking to me today on the programme.
My pleasure, Ger. Thank you.
See the child with the golden hair, but eyes that show the emptiness inside. Do we know? Can we understand just how he feels, or have we really tried? See him now as he stands alone and watches children play a children's game. Simple child, he looks almost like the others, yet they know he's not the same. Scorn not his simplicity, but rather try to love him all the more. Simplicity, oh no, oh no. See him stare, not recognizing that kind face that only yesterday he loved. The loving face of a mother who can't understand what she's been guilty of. How she cried tears of happiness the day the doctor told her it's a boy. Now she cries tears of helplessness and thinks of all the things he can't enjoy. Scorn not his simplicity, but rather try to love him all the more. Scorn not his simplicity, oh no, oh face the future, hopefully surrounded by despair. He won't ask for your pity or your sympathy, but surely you should care. Scorn not his simplicity, but rather try to love him all the more. Scorn not simplicity, oh no, oh no,
No, beautiful. Absolutely. That's Luke Kelly's version of Scorn Not His Simplicity. And what a lovely conversation that was with Patsy McGarry. Thank you to Patsy for taking time to talk to me today about his book, Well, Holy God. There was wonderful reaction to last week's programme when Marty Morrissey joined me and we chatted. We didn't chat for the 2 hours, but the chat was spread over the 2 hours and it was absolutely great, and a bit of music in there as well. And he mentioned at the time that he was coming to Spain, to Benalmádena to be precise, in October, start of October, and tickets have been flying. Now the Irish tickets are sold because they're all package tickets, but there are still a couple left for the 3 nights that he mentioned. And if you would like to do that, if you are living in Spain and you would like to go along on any of the 3 nights that he mentioned, well then you're more than welcome to do so. The Marty Party, you can check it out on our website at TRE.radio, and there's a little QR code there that you can scan and it will download the tickets for you. Alrighty, so we wish Marty the very best of luck with that event, but I wanted to say thank you to everybody who responded so favourably, and I really enjoyed the conversation last week as well. It's done and dusted time for me because time is running out. We're heading towards the news. I want to say a big thank you to Patricia Traynor for joining me this evening to talk to us about potatoes and the famine, or spuds or murphies as she called them. Thanks as well to George for the fascinating story on mantellas and headscarves, and to Patsy McGarry for talking to me about his book, Well, Holy God. Going to leave you with this one. It'll take us to news. In fact, we won't get much of it in, but we'll do our best.
They never met, the singer and the swinger. She walked in, they walked around each other, fighting for the mirror and smiling. She was awkward, I was tongue-tied. She was goofy, and she aspired to perfection as a hipster. And she asked me, how should I wear my problem hair? A dirty nose with problem hair. She asked me, I always wonder how things could have been. caught the girl, her eyelids started to flutter, and in my arms she passed out cold. Are you okay? Just lie still, you'll feel better. Feel better. Feel better. Feel better. I always wonder how things could have been. Spend every second day just dreaming how the first one ought to be. My dream was realized, but I was sleeping. I was sleeping. I was sleeping. I was sleeping.
Ger Sweeney presents Live on Eire in association with emeraldconnection.net.
You've been listening to a TRE production. If you've enjoyed this programme, there'll be another episode waiting for you next week, right here on this platform, where you can also access our extensive back catalogue of shows and interviews. For more information on our live programming, social media channels and apps, and how to contact Talk Radio Europe, please visit tre.radio.